The jingle of the old diner's door was the sweetest sound Saraphina Cole had heard all night. It meant the last customer was finally gone and her 14-hour shift was over. 14 hours on top of the 5 she had already spent that morning scrubbing floors in an office building downtown. The clock on the grease-stained wall read 2:17 in the morning. With a sigh that seemed to drain what little life she had left, she collapsed into a cracked vinyl booth and pulled a worn envelope from her apron pocket. Her fingers trembled slightly as she spilled the night's tips onto the table. Coins clinked and a few crumpled bills unfolded like tired flowers. She counted slowly, her heart sinking with each dollar. It was far less than she had hoped, far less than she needed. She divided the money into 3 mental piles in her mind. The first pile was for her landlord, who had already changed the locks once and threatened to throw her belongings into the street. The second pile was for the hospital, for the bills that still haunted her 2 years after her little foster sister Lily had lost her battle with leukemia. Saraphina still remembered holding Lily's cold hand in that sterile room, promising her she would become a nurse and save others since she could not save her. The third pile, the smallest and most precious pile, was for nursing school, that distant mountain she had been climbing 1 penny at a time. She smoothed out a wrinkled $5 bill, her thumb brushing over Abraham Lincoln's face, when the shrill ring of the diner's phone shattered the silence like broken glass. Saraphina flinched. No one called this late. It was probably a wrong number. She thought about letting it ring. But what if it was her landlord making good on his threats? With a knot of dread tightening in her stomach, she walked to the counter and lifted the receiver. "Hello, Moonlight Diner," she said, her voice rough and raw from exhaustion. The sound on the other end was not an adult. It was the ragged, hitched breathing of a child desperately trying not to sob. "Hello," a small, trembling voice whispered. Saraphina's exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by razor-sharp alertness. "Hi there, sweetheart," she said, her voice softening the way it used to when Lily had nightmares. "What is wrong? Are you okay?" My daddy," the little boy stammered, his words tumbling out in a terrified rush. "He is on the floor. There is red stuff everywhere, a big pool of it, and there is a knife in his tummy. He will not wake up. He will not answer me." A full-blown sob finally broke through. "Please, I am so scared." The blood in Saraphina's veins turned to ice. A pool of red, a knife in his stomach. Her mind, trained through countless hours of studying nursing textbooks by flashlight in her basement apartment, instantly conjured the image. Massive blood loss, internal bleeding, minutes, not hours, before death. She gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white, the burn scar on her wrist stretching tight. This was not a prank call. This was not a wrong number. This was real terror. And somewhere in this city, a little boy was watching his father die. If this story satisfies you, do not forget to like, share with those you love, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next emotional journey. Was there ever a moment in your life when a stranger's call changed everything? Saraphina drew a deep breath, forcing her voice to remain calm, even as her heart hammered wildly, as if it might burst out of her chest. "Sweetheart, I need you to tell me your home address. Do you know the address?" The boy sobbed and recited a string of numbers and a street name, his trembling voice breaking apart. Saraphina recognized the area immediately. Wellington Heights, the enclave of the wealthiest people in the city. A place she had never set foot in, only driven past, gazing at the towering iron gates with the eyes of someone standing outside a world that was never meant to be hers. "What is your name?" she asked softly, her voice like a lullaby. "Theo. My name is Theo. Theo, listen to me. Her name is Saraphina. She is coming right now. Stay on the line with her. Do not hang up. She will talk to you the entire way." She set the receiver down on the counter for only a split second, her mind spinning. She should call the police. Call an ambulance. That was the most reasonable thing to do, but then the memory crashed over her like an icy wave. That night, the night Lily died, she had called an ambulance. She had done everything right, but they arrived too late. 23 minutes. 23 minutes in which Lily could have been saved. When the ambulance finally arrived, her sister's eyes were already closed. Her lips had turned blue, and Saraphina could only clutch her little sister's cold, lifeless body and scream in despair. No, she would not let that happen again, not tonight. Not to another child. Saraphina lifted the receiver again and wedged it against her shoulder. "Theo, are you still there?" "Yes." The boy's voice was thin as a fragile thread. "Good. She is on her way. Remember, do not hang up." She turned back to the booth table where 3 stacks of cash still lay. Rent money, Lily's medical bills, money for her dream of becoming a nurse. Her entire life was contained in those crumpled bills. She looked at them for 1 second. Just one. Then, without hesitation, she swept them all into her apron pocket. Not because she needed them for this trip, but because she did not know if she would ever come back. She ran out the back door, not even bothering to lock the diner. Her boss would kill her if he knew. But it did not matter. Nothing mattered more than the trembling voice coming through the phone pressed to her shoulder. Saraphina's car was a rusted metal box. 20 years old, bought for $500 from a junkyard. It coughed and wheezed every time she started it, screeched whenever she hit the brakes, and sometimes stalled in the middle of the road for no reason at all. She opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then fell silent. Her heart seemed to stop. No, not now, please. She turned the key again, her hands shaking. Please, please. She prayed to anyone who might be listening. To God, to the universe, to Lily's soul wherever it might be. Please let her get there in time. The engine coughed once, then twice, then suddenly roared to life, like an old beast with a last reserve of strength. Saraphina burst into tears of relief. She slammed the accelerator, the tires screeched against the asphalt, and the car shot into the night. The dashboard clock read 2:23 in the morning. Wellington Heights was at least 20 minutes away if she obeyed traffic laws, but she did not have 20 minutes. That man did not have 20 minutes. Theo, she called into the phone, still wedged against her shoulder. Are you still there? Yes. The boy's voice was still trembling but steadier now that someone was talking to him. Is your father still breathing? Look at his chest. Is it going up and down? There was a pause. Then Theo's voice came back. Yes, but very slowly. Saraphina pressed harder on the gas. Good. Your father is still alive. She is coming to save him. But you need to do something for her. Can you do it? Yes. Find a towel, a bath towel, a hand towel, anything. And press it against where the knife is. Press hard, but do not pull the knife out. Do you understand? I am scared. Theo's voice broke. There is so much blood. She knew he was scared. Saraphina swallowed her tears. She had been that scared once too. But you are the bravest person she knows. You made the call. You found her. Now you just need to do one more thing. You can do it. For your father. Tiny footsteps echoed through the phone. Then the rustle of fabric. Then Theo spoke again, his voice shaking but determined. I did it. I am pressing the towel against the knife. That is very good. Theo. Saraphina drove straight through a red light, her heart pounding like a war drum. Keep holding it there. She is almost there. The city at night streamed past like blurred streaks of light beyond the car window. The streets nearly deserted, only weak yellow street lamps spilling onto asphalt damp with dew. Saraphina drove like a madwoman, her hands clenched around the steering wheel until her knuckles ached, the phone still wedged between her shoulder and her ear. Theo's small voice, the only thread tying her to that distant mansion. Aunt Saraphina, the boy spoke weakly. Are you still there? I'm still here, Saraphina replied, her eyes never leaving the road. I am not going anywhere. Tell me, how is your father now? The towel has so much blood on it. It is all red. Do I need to get another towel? Saraphina calculated quickly. If he changed it, the pressure would lessen, and the bleeding could worsen. No, sweetheart. Keep that towel there. Press hard. Do not lift it. No matter how soaked it gets, do not lift it. Do you understand? Yes, Theo's voice caught. But my hand is so tired. I know you are tired. Saraphina swallowed, her throat dry and burning. But you are saving your father. Every second you hold that towel, you are keeping him here with you. You are very brave. Theo, braver than anyone she has ever known. She flew through another intersection, the light still red, but she did not slow down. A large truck suddenly burst in from the left, its horn blaring. Saraphina jerked the wheel hard to the right, her heart leaping into her throat. The old car shuddered violently, tires shrieking against the road. She escaped by a hair's breadth, the left side mirror nearly brushing the truck's body. The truck driver's horn still echoed behind her, probably along with curses she did not hear and did not care about. Aunt Saraphina, Theo cried in panic. Are you okay? I heard a really loud noise. I am fine. Saraphina forced her voice steady, though her heart was still racing. The road is just a little rough. Do not worry. Tell me about your father. What is his name? My father's name is Marcus, Theo said, his voice steadier now that he had something to focus on. Marcus Stone. My father is the tallest person I know. My father is very strong. He can lift me with one hand. He beats all the bad guys. Saraphina smiled bitterly. A man so strong now, lying on the floor with a knife buried in his stomach. Life was cruelly ironic. Your father sounds like a wonderful man. Yes, my father is the best. Theo's voice suddenly broke. I do not want my father to die. I do not want to be alone. Lily's face flashed through Saraphina's mind. Lily lying in a hospital bed, the last strands of hair gone from chemotherapy, wide eyes filled with a fear no 9-year-old should ever have. Sister Sarah, will I be alone? Lily had asked, and Saraphina had promised she would not be. She had promised to always be there, but she had to work, had to earn money, had to leave the hospital for a few hours, and when she returned, Lily was gone. Alone. Her sister had died alone because she was not there. Tears streamed down Saraphina's face, but she did not wipe them away. You will not be alone, she said, her voice thick but unwavering. I am coming, I promise, and I will keep that promise. She pressed the accelerator harder. The aging car groaned in protest, but still picked up speed. The speedometer climbed to a number the vehicle had probably never reached in its entire 20-year existence. Aunt Saraphina, my father's eyes are closed, but his mouth is a little open. There is a noise in his throat. Saraphina knew immediately. The airway was obstructed, maybe by blood, maybe by the tongue falling back as he lost consciousness. Theo, listen to me. Gently turn your father's head to one side, just his head. Do not move his body. Either side is fine. Then see if the noise gets better. There was silence for a few seconds. Then Theo's voice came back. It is gone. There is no more noise. Saraphina let out a breath she had been holding. Very good. You did so well. She saw the Wellington Heights sign appear in her headlights. Just a few more minutes now. I am almost there. Theo, hold on to your father just a little longer. And then she saw it. The towering iron gates of the estate rose out of the darkness, like the jaws of a colossal beast. Beyond them, the black shapes of trees and the faint glow of lights from a massive house lurking in the shadows. The iron gate stood ajar just wide enough for Saraphina's car to slip through, which was strange for a luxury estate like this, a place where the gates should have been sealed tight at nearly 3 a.m, but she had no time to think about that. She drove along the white gravel driveway, neatly trimmed rows of trees lining both sides, the kind she had only ever seen in movies about the rich. The mansion rose before her like a castle from a fairy tale, larger than any house she had ever seen. Towering white columns, enormous glass windows, broad stone steps, leading up to an intricately carved oak door. This was the world of people who lived inside dreams. While she lived inside nightmares, Saraphina slammed on the brakes at the front entrance, left the engine running, and bolted out of the car. Theo, I am here, she shouted into the phone before tossing it onto the passenger seat. She ran up the steps, nearly stumbling in her worn flat shoes. The front door was unlocked as well. She pushed it open and stepped into a space so vast her breathing echoed like whispers in a cathedral. A crystal chandelier hung overhead. Polished marble floors reflected soft golden light. Large oil paintings lined the walls. Fresh flowers sat in expensive porcelain vases. Everything radiated luxury and power, yet the silence was chilling. Theo, Saraphina called out, her voice reverberating through this cavern of wealth. Theo, where are you? Aunt Saraphina, a small voice answered from the left. From a door standing ajar, then a tiny figure burst out of the darkness. Saraphina barely registered a mess of black hair and a small tear-streaked face before the boy crashed into her, clinging to her legs as if afraid she would disappear. You came, Theo sobbed, his face pressed into her dirty jeans. You came. My dad is in there. Saraphina knelt down and looked into the boy's wide, reddened eyes. A 6-year-old child, slender, with tiny hands smeared with dried blood, his father's blood. Saraphina's heart clenched. This was Theo. This was the trembling voice from the phone. This was the brave child who had held pressure on a wound the entire time she drove here. You did so well. Theo, she said, her voice breaking. You did so well. Now take me to your father. Theo grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the open door, crossing the threshold. Saraphina stepped into a vast living room filled with expensive leather sofas and a grand marble fireplace. But she did not see the luxury. She only saw red, blood, so much blood, spreading across an expensive Persian rug like a massive pool, soaking into the finely hand-woven wool. The metallic stench hit her, a smell she knew all too well from nights spent studying in the emergency room while Lily was being treated. And in the center of that pool lay a man. On his back, one arm stretched out as if reaching for something, the other resting on his abdomen, where a once white towel was now completely soaked red. His white dress shirt had turned a dark crimson. His face was pale as paper, lips slightly parted, eyes closed. Yet even like this, Saraphina could see that he was a handsome man. Sharp, angular features, a strong square jaw, coal-black hair, tall and broad-shouldered, the body of someone accustomed to power, and the knife, it was still there, buried deep in his abdomen, only the handle protruding. A stainless steel kitchen knife with an expensive wooden handle, a knife from his own kitchen. Someone had used it to stab him. Saraphina rushed to his side and dropped to her knees. Ignoring the blood soaking through her pants, she placed 2 fingers on his neck, searching for a pulse. Her heart stopped as she waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, nothing. She shifted her fingers, pressed harder, and then she felt it. A pulse, faint as the flutter of a butterfly in a storm, but it was there. He was still alive. Saraphina lifted her gaze to his chest. It rose and fell slowly, weakly, but it was moving. He was still breathing. He was still fighting. "Is my dad alive?" Theo's trembling voice came from behind her. "He is." Saraphina turned to the boy, her eyes filled with determination. "Your father is alive, and I will make sure he stays that way." Saraphina scanned the room, searching for a landline or anything she could use to call an ambulance. Then she remembered that her mobile phone was still lying on the passenger seat of her car outside, and she had no time to run back for it. Every passing second meant more blood draining from the man on the floor. "Theo, is there anyone else in the house?" she asked urgently. There is, Miss Betty," the boy said, his voice trembling. "She looks after me, but she is sleeping in her room, and I kept calling her and she would not wake up." Saraphina ran in the direction Theo pointed. Finding a small room behind the kitchen where a middle-aged woman lay motionless on the bed, she shook the woman hard by the shoulder with no response, checked her pulse and found it steady, her breathing slow and deep in an unnatural way. Poisoned. Saraphina realized instantly, sleeping pills or something stronger. This woman would not wake up for hours. There was no one to help her, no phone within reach, and the man outside was slowly dying. Saraphina ran back into the living room, her mind spinning as she calculated. An ambulance would take at least 15 minutes to reach this place. 15 minutes was far too long. She had seen the wound. She knew he did not have 15 minutes. There was only one option left. She had to take him to the hospital herself, but as she looked down at the motionless man on the floor, despair rose in her chest. He was at least 1.85 meters tall, powerfully built with the broad arms and shoulders of someone who trained regularly. She guessed he weighed close to 90 kilograms, and what about her? She weighed only 48 kilograms, her body frail from chronic malnutrition and long-standing anemia. She could not even lift a case of 24 beers without gasping for breath. How could she possibly drag a man nearly twice her weight to the car? But then she looked at Theo, the boy standing there with his tiny hands stained with his father's blood, eyes filled with every shred of hope a 6-year-old could hold. And Saraphina knew she had no choice. She knelt beside the man and slid her arms under his armpits. His body was hot with fever and slick with blood. She drew a deep breath, clenched her teeth, and pulled. The man did not move. She pulled harder, her back folding, her arms shaking, but he lay there like a slab of stone. She let go and gasped for air, sweat breaking out across her forehead. Her head began to spin, bright spots dancing before her eyes. The familiar warning signs of anemia. No, she told herself, not now. She could not faint now. Saraphina closed her eyes and took several deep breaths to steady her heart. She thought of Lily, thought of her sister's eyes looking at her one last time, thought of the promise she had failed to keep. Then she opened her eyes, looked down at the stranger before her, and whispered that she would never let another child lose their loved one again. She knelt down once more, grabbed the edge of the large Persian rug he was lying on, and gripped it with trembling hands. She could not lift him, but she could pull the rug. She leaned her full body weight backward, gritting her teeth, using the smooth floor to slide him across the room inch by inch, dragging the man's heavy body with her. His blood smeared her hands, her clothes, her face, as she leaned too close, the metallic stench flooding her nose and making her want to vomit. But she swallowed it down, step by step by step. She dragged him across the living room, through the grand hall, and out to the front door, her back screaming in pain, her arms feeling as though they might tear from their sockets. Her knees struck the steps and she fell, the man's body crashing down on top of her, his weight crushing her chest so she could not breathe for a few terrifying seconds. "Aunt Saraphina," Theo screamed. "I am okay." She gritted her teeth and shoved the man aside, struggling to her feet, her legs shaking as if they might give out at any moment. She kept dragging him down the steps. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. his head striking the stone, and she prayed she was not causing another injury. At last she hauled him to the car, opened the back door, and faced the final challenge. Lifting him onto the back seat, Saraphina did not know how she did it. She did not remember where the strength came from. She only remembered letting out some wordless scream and pouring everything left in her exhausted body into one final heave, and somehow the man lay across the back seat of her car. She pulled his legs inside carefully, making sure not to disturb the knife still embedded in his abdomen. Then she turned to Theo. "Get in the car, sit in the back, and hold your father's head. Do not let his head move." The boy climbed in, sat on the floor of the back seat, and gently rested his father's head on his lap. Saraphina staggered around to the driver's seat, her hands trembling as she opened the door. She collapsed into the seat, and for a moment she looked into the rearview mirror. The man's pallid face stared back at her. He looked dead, but he was not dead, and she would not let him die. Saraphina slammed her foot on the accelerator, and the aging car shot out through the iron gates like an arrow released from a bow. The dashboard clock reading 3:12 in the morning. St. Mary Hospital was roughly 15 minutes away if she obeyed the law, and she did not have 15 minutes. She pressed the gas harder, forcing the car to its limit. The engine roared in protest, but still accelerated, the speedometer needle trembling past a number the car had likely never reached before. "Aunt Saraphina." Theo's voice came from the back. "Blood, there is so much blood." Saraphina flicked her eyes to the rearview mirror and saw Theo's tiny hands struggling to keep the towel pressed against his father's abdomen. The cloth soaked dark red, blood seeping between the boy's fingers. "Keep pressing hard," she said, her voice steadier than the panic raging inside her. "We are almost there." She ran the first red light, tires shrieking against the dew-slick road. The streets mercifully empty at this hour, no other cars but hers, and the darkness. She ran the second red light, then the third. Her mind narrowed to the strip of road ahead and the faint, uneven breathing of the man behind her. The memory of that night crashed over her again like a freezing wave. The night she drove Lily to the hospital for the last time, her sister curled in the back seat just like this man now. Lily looking at her with wide, terrified eyes and whispering, "Sister Sarah, am I going to die?" Saraphina had said no. She had promised everything would be fine, but it had not been fine. The ambulance came too late. The doctors could not save her, and Lily died in her arms. Eyes closed, but a smile still on her lips because she believed her sister's promise. Tears streamed down Saraphina's face, but she could not wipe them away. Her hands had to grip the wheel, her eyes had to stay on the road. "This time will be different," she whispered, not knowing whether she was speaking to herself or to Lily's soul somewhere beyond the night. "This time I will make it in time. Aunt Saraphina." Theo's voice rang out again, more frantic now. My dad is not breathing." Saraphina's heart seemed to stop. She glanced in the mirror and saw the man's chest motionless. No. "Theo, listen to me." She forced her voice calm while everything inside her screamed. "Put your hand on your father's chest. Press down hard and let go. Press down and let go." "Can you do that?" she heard Theo crying. Then the sound of a small hand pushing against a chest. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then Theo shouted, "He is breathing again. His chest is moving again." Relief crashed through Saraphina as if someone had lifted a massive stone from her chest. She pressed the accelerator even harder, the car rattling as if it might tear itself apart but still surging forward. The hospital lights appeared ahead, shining like a lighthouse in the dark. So close now. "Just a few 100 meters more," she murmured, not knowing whether she was encouraging herself or praying. Please do not die. Your son needs you." She cleared the final intersection, and the emergency entrance came into view. Blinding white lights, a Red Cross sign, sliding glass doors. Saraphina slammed on the brakes, tires screaming as the car skidded to a stop in a cloud of white smoke, right in front of the emergency room. She shoved the door open and stumbled out, her legs shaking, her head spinning with exhaustion and anemia, but she screamed with every last shred of strength left in her throat. "Help us. Please help us. He is dying." Everything happened like a whirlwind after Saraphina's scream. The automatic glass doors burst open, and 2 paramedics rushed out with a rolling gurney. They took in the sight of her standing there, clothes soaked in blood from head to toe, then turned to the car where a man lay motionless in the back seat, penetrating abdominal stab wound. One of them shouted after a quick glance, "Call the on-call surgeon. Prep the operating room immediately." They lifted the man from the car with the practiced precision of people who had done this thousands of times. Saraphina staggered back on trembling legs, watching them place Marcus onto the gurney. His face waxed pale, his lips already turning gray. If not for the faint rise and fall of his chest, she would have thought he was dead. Severe blood loss. The second paramedic called out as they pushed the gurney inside. Weak pulse, dropping blood pressure, needs immediate transfusion. Saraphina ran after them, Theo clinging tightly to her hand, his small palms still smeared with his father's blood. They raced down corridors, flooded with fluorescent light, the wheels of the gurney rattling across tile like urgent drumbeats. Then they shoved the gurney through a pair of large double doors marked operating room, and the doors slammed shut in her face. Saraphina stood frozen before the closed doors. She looked down at her hands, fingers trembling, caked with the dried blood of a man whose name she had not even known until minutes earlier. The harsh fluorescent lights exposed every stain on her clothes, every smear of blood on her face, every trace of the nightmare that had just unfolded. People stared at her. An elderly woman on a waiting room chair covered her mouth in horror. A man pulled his child farther away as if Saraphina were a monster. A young nurse looked at her with open suspicion. Saraphina knew what they were thinking. She looked like a killer. She looked like the one who had driven that knife into the man's abdomen. Aunt Saraphina. Theo's voice rose, small and shaking. Is my dad going to be okay? Saraphina knelt down and met the boy's tear-swollen eyes. She did not know what to say. She did not know whether his father would live or die. She only knew she had done everything she could. The doctors are helping your dad, she said hoarsely. Your dad is very strong. He will try. Just then 2 police officers entered the emergency department. They scanned the room and their eyes stopped on Saraphina at once. Of course they did. She was the only person there who looked as though she had bathed in blood. She was the one who had brought the victim in. That woman. One officer pointed at her, his voice stern. Come with us. Saraphina stood up, instinct urging her to run, but her legs no longer had the strength to obey. She nodded and tightened her grip on Theo's hand, but the officer shook his head. Just you. The child stays here. No, Saraphina said, her voice suddenly hard. He does not leave me. He just watched his father get stabbed. He needs someone with him. The officers exchanged a glance. Finally, the older one sighed and nodded his consent. They led her to a corner of the waiting area and began questioning her. Who are you? How do you know the victim? What time were you at the scene? Why did you not call the police? Why did you drive the victim to the hospital yourself? Saraphina answered every question in a flat voice drained by exhaustion. She told them about the phone call at 2:17 in the morning, about Theo's trembling voice, about choosing to drive instead of waiting for the police, about the mansion with its gate already open and its door unlocked, about the man lying in a pool of blood, about dragging him to the car by herself. The officers listened, took notes, and watched her with eyes half believing and half doubtful. Her story sounded too insane to be true. A diner waitress receives a call from a strange child and decides to drive across the city to save a man she has never met. Who would do that? We will verify your information, the older officer said. You are not to leave the hospital until we give permission. Saraphina nodded. She had no intention of going anywhere. She looked down at Theo, sitting beside her, his eyes fixed on the operating room doors. She would stay here until she knew whether his father lived or died. Just then a nurse approached. You are the one who brought the patient in, right? She asked without emotion. We need a deposit for the surgery. Saraphina looked down at the apron still tied around her waist, where the cash she had hastily gathered was still tucked inside the pocket. Saraphina stood up, her legs still trembling, and followed the nurse to the cashier's desk. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out the crumpled wad of money she had hurriedly gathered from the diner. Coins clinked as they rolled across the counter. Wrinkled bills smeared with dried blood from her hands were slowly spread flat. She counted carefully in front of the cashier, her lips moving with each number. $123.67. That was everything she had. The rent money her landlord had threatened to throw her belongings onto the street over if she did not pay within 3 days. The installment payments for Lily's hospital bills, a debt she had struggled to repay for 2 years even though her sister was no longer alive. The money for her nursing school dream, a mountain she had climbed $1 at a time for so many years. It was all here, $123.67. The cashier looked at the small pile of loose money on the counter, then up at Saraphina with a puzzled expression. The minimum deposit is $500, she said in a flat, mechanical voice. Without a deposit, we cannot proceed with the surgery. It felt as if someone had punched Saraphina in the chest. $500. She did not have $500. She did not even have half of that. Please, she said, her voice breaking. He will die if he does not have surgery. I will find a way to pay later, I will work to repay it. I will do anything. But please save him first. The cashier shook her head, her face unmoved. That is hospital policy. I do not have the authority to change it. Saraphina wanted to scream. She wanted to slam her hand on the counter and shout that a human life was slipping away, while this woman sat here talking about policy. But she did not. She knew it would not help. She looked down at her hands still stained with the blood of the man lying in the operating room, and then she saw it. The watch. Still there, wrapped around her left wrist, half hidden beneath her sleeve. The old watch with its scratched glass face and worn leather strap. Her mother's watch. Memory crashed over her like a tidal wave. The night of the fire. She was only 8 years old. Flames erupted from the lower floor, devouring everything in their path. Her mother clutched her tightly and ran upstairs to the only window that offered escape. Her father was in the yard below, shouting for them to jump, but the fire was too close, the smoke too thick. Her mother coughed violently, eyes burning red from the smoke. She removed the watch from her own wrist and fastened it around Saraphina's small arm. "Hold on to this, my child," she said, her voice shaking. "This belonged to your grandmother. Now I give it to you." Then her mother pushed her out the window onto the rescue cushion below. She landed safely and looked up, waiting for her parents to jump after her. But they never did. The flames swallowed them before they could reach the window. Saraphina was left alone in the world with her mother's old watch as the only thing that remained of her family. She had kept it for 19 years. Through the orphanage where she was beaten and starved, through the relationship with the man who deceived her and stole her 5 years of savings, through Lily's death, through all the nights she lay crying alone in her dark basement apartment, the watch was the one thing she had never given up. It was her mother, her father, her family, everything she had left. And now she was about to give it up. Saraphina's hands shook as she unfastened the watch from her wrist. She looked at its face one last time, at the scratches in the glass, at the leather strap worn thin by years. She remembered how her mother used to wear it, remembered the soft scent of her mother's perfume whenever she pressed her face against her wrist, remembered her mother's voice singing her to sleep each night. Tears streamed down her cheeks and fell onto the watch face. She placed it on the counter beside the pile of crumpled change. "This is an antique watch," she said, her voice choked. It is worth at least a few $100s. Please take it. Please. This is everything I have in this world." The cashier looked at the watch, then at Saraphina's tear-soaked face. For the first time, her expression softened a little. She picked up the watch, examined it, then sighed. "All right," she said. "I will record this as the deposit, but you will need to pay the remaining balance later." Saraphina nodded, unable to speak. She watched the watch disappear behind the cashier's counter, taking with it the last piece of her family. She had lost everything. The rent money, the hospital debt, the money for her dream, and now her mother's watch. She had nothing left. "This is everything I have," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Please save him." Saraphina made her way back to the waiting room, her legs feeling as though they were weighted with lead, and found Theo still sitting on the hard plastic chair, red-rimmed eyes fixed on the operating room doors, the child heartbreakingly small in the wide space washed in cold fluorescent light. She sat down beside him, and as if he had been waiting for that moment, Theo leaned his head against her shoulder, then slowly slid down until he lay curled in her lap, utterly exhausted in body and mind. A 6-year-old who had endured far too much in a single night, watching his father be stabbed, seeing blood, making the desperate call for help, holding pressure on a wound through the endless wait. Saraphina gently stroked his tangled black hair, easing apart strands matted with sweat and tears. Her fingers brushed his cheek, feeling the warm softness of childhood skin. Theo was asleep now, his breathing even. Long lashes fluttering like butterfly wings. She looked down at his small hands, still marked with dried blood beneath the nails, and in the tiny creases of his fingers, she lifted one hand carefully and used her own saliva to clean each finger, each trace of dried blood, each small palm line, wiping with the tenderness of someone trying to erase an invisible wound from a child's soul. Lily had once lain like this in her lap. The memory surged without warning, sharp as a blade. The nights in the hospital during chemotherapy when her little sister would fall asleep on her thighs. Lily's hair then mostly gone from the treatments, only a few fragile strands remaining. Yet she had still smiled. Lily always smiled, Sister Sarah. "I dreamed I got better," Lily had told her on a night just like this. "I dreamed you and I lived in a small house with a flower garden. You were a nurse and I went to school. Every evening you cooked dinner for me, Then I grew up and became a doctor so I could help children who were sick like me." Saraphina had held her sister tightly and promised to make that dream come true. She had promised to become a nurse, promised to always stay by her side, promised so many things, and she had kept none of them. On Lily's last night, she had not been there. She had taken an extra night shift to pay hospital bills. She had kissed her sister's forehead and promised to return before she woke, but when she came back, Lily never woke again. She died at 3:27 in the morning, alone in a cold hospital room filled with the steady hum of machines. No one holding her hand, no one singing to her, no one telling her everything would be all right. The nurse said Lily had called her name before she went. Sister Sarah, Sister Sarah. Calling until she no longer had the strength, Saraphina had collapsed beside the empty bed and cried like a wounded animal, cried until there were no tears left, until her voice was raw, until she understood that no amount of crying would bring Lily back. And from that night on, she carried guilt like a scar that would never heal. Tears slid silently down Saraphina's cheeks as she sat in the hospital waiting room with a strange child sleeping in her lap. She let them fall without wiping them away. She looked at Theo and saw Lily, saw the fragility of childhood, the terror of losing someone you love, the mingling of hope and despair behind closed eyelids in an exhausted sleep. She would not let Theo lose his father, she told herself in silence. She would not let another child endure what she had endured. She would not let any more children call out into the dark, with no one answering. The wall clock showed 5:17 in the morning. More than 2 hours had passed since Marcus was taken into surgery. No doctor had come out. There was still no word on whether he lived or died. Saraphina remained there, her back against the hard plastic chair, her hand still gently smoothing Theo's hair. She had no money left, no mother's watch, nothing at all except empty hands and a strange child asleep in her lap. But she stayed. She would stay, until she knew whether this boy's father lived or died. And then heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Many footsteps. Saraphina looked up and the blood in her veins seemed to freeze. 5 men entered the waiting room like a black storm, dressed in dark, expensive suits tailored to perfection, yet unable to hide the danger radiating from every step they took, their eyes cold as ice, sweeping the room with the alertness of predators, patients and families instinctively parting to either side, some primal sense urging them to stay away from these men. The one in front was an elderly man with hair white as snow, his back straight as a ruler, despite the deep lines carved by age into his face. His features looked as though they had been chiseled from granite, utterly devoid of emotion, gray eyes piercing everything before him with the gaze of someone who had seen too much death to fear anything anymore. His eyes stopped on Saraphina, on the thin young woman soaked in blood from head to toe, sitting on a plastic chair with a sleeping child in her lap. "That's her," one of the younger men said, pointing straight at Saraphina. "That girl brought the boss to the hospital." Before Saraphina could react, 2 men lunged forward. One grabbed her by the collar and yanked her to her feet, sending Theo tumbling off the chair and waking in terror. The other wrenched her arms behind her back with the crushing strength of a bear. "Who the hell are you?" The man gripping her collar roared, his face inches from hers. "What did you do to the boss? You stab him." Saraphina could not answer. She could not breathe. The rough hand clenched her collar, the fabric cutting into her throat, her head spinning from lack of air as bright spots danced before her eyes. "Let her go," a small but furious voice rang out. Theo had stood up, his face flushed with fear and rage. He rushed forward, pounding the man's leg with his tiny fists. "Let her go," he screamed through tears. "She saved my dad. She is not bad. She is a good person. Don't touch her." The white-haired man raised a hand and everything stopped. "Release her," he said, his voice low and commanding. The man holding Saraphina reluctantly let go. She collapsed back onto the chair, coughing violently. Clutching her throat, Theo immediately ran to her side and wrapped his arms around her as if afraid someone would tear her away again. The white-haired man stepped closer and looked down at Saraphina with an unreadable expression. "This boy is Theo Stone," he said slowly. "The only son of Marcus Stone. He says you saved his father. Can you explain?" Saraphina looked up, still coughing softly, her throat burning. She met the man's icy gray eyes and told everything, about the call at 2:17 in the morning, about Theo's trembling voice, about her decision to drive through the night to the mansion, about the man lying in a pool of blood with a knife embedded in his abdomen, about dragging him to the car alone, about the mad dash to the hospital. The white-haired man listened without saying a word. When Saraphina finished, he took out his phone and called someone. "Check the mansion's security cameras," he said curtly, All footage from midnight until 4 in the morning. Send it to me immediately. Several tense minutes passed in silence. Then his phone vibrated. He watched the footage, his face still expressionless, but Saraphina noticed his eyes widen slightly at one point. He replayed a segment several times before finally looking up at her. His gaze had completely changed. No longer cold, no longer suspicious, replaced by something Saraphina could not name. Perhaps astonishment. Perhaps respect. Or perhaps both. "My name is Lorenzo," he said, his voice significantly softer. "I am Marcus Stone's advisor. I have seen the footage. I saw everything. You dragged Marcus to the car by yourself. You drove him here. You saved his life." He inclined his head slightly toward Saraphina, a gesture of respect she never imagined she would receive from a man like him. "You saved Marcus Stone's life," he said slowly, deliberately. "Do you have any idea who you just saved?" Saraphina looked at Lorenzo, not understanding his question at all. She had just saved a man who had been stabbed. A father, someone's husband perhaps. What was special about him beyond living in a massive mansion and being obviously wealthy? Lorenzo gestured for the other men to step back, then sat down on the chair opposite her, studying her for a long moment as if weighing how much to say. Then he sighed and began. "Marcus Stone is not an ordinary businessman," he said in a low, measured voice. "He is the head of the Stone family, the most powerful family on the East Coast of the United States. We control everything from ports to casinos, from real estate to things you would rather not know about." Saraphina felt as if a bucket of ice water had been poured over her head. She understood what Lorenzo was saying. She had seen enough films and read enough news to know what people like that were called. Mafia. He was telling her she had just saved a mafia boss. "Marcus has a nickname in our world," Lorenzo continued, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "They call him the Stone, because his heart is as cold as rock, because his hand never trembles when something needs to be done. The number of men he has killed cannot be counted. The number of enemies who want him dead is as countless as the stars." Saraphina swallowed hard, her throat dry and bitter. She looked down at her hands, still marked with the dried blood of Marcus Stone, the blood of a killer, the blood of a mafia boss. Had she risked her life to save someone like that? "The man who stabbed him tonight was Vincent," Lorenzo went on, his voice darkening. "Marcus's right hand, the one he trusted most besides me. He betrayed him and joined the rival faction. He poisoned the nanny, waited until Marcus came home alone with Theo, then struck. He thought Marcus would die and the Stone Empire would be his." Saraphina remembered the gate left open, the front door unlocked. Now she understood. Vincent had opened the way for his accomplices, but they must have left before she arrived, believing Marcus would die without needing to see it with their own eyes. "You can leave now," Lorenzo said, his tone unexpectedly gentler. "I understand if you are afraid. You owe us nothing. You saved Marcus's life, and for that I will make sure no one touches you. I will return your money and your watch. I will have someone take you home safely. You can forget tonight ever happened." Saraphina looked at Lorenzo. Then she looked at Theo, who had fallen asleep again without her noticing, his knees pressed against her side, one small hand still clutching the hem of her shirt as if afraid she might vanish, his face peaceful in sleep though, tear tracks still glimmered on his cheeks. She thought of Marcus Stone, the mafia boss, the cold-blooded killer, the Stone with a heart of ice, but she also thought of the way Theo spoke about his father. "My dad is the tallest person I know. My dad is so strong. My dad can lift me with one hand." To Theo, Marcus Stone was not a mafia boss, not a killer, not the Stone. To Theo, Marcus Stone was simply his father, the biggest man in the world, a superhero who could defeat all the bad guys, the entire world of a 6-year-old boy. Saraphina thought of herself at 8 years old, when she lost her parents in the fire, when she stood alone amid the ashes with her mother's watch on her wrist. She remembered that loneliness, that fear, the hollow emptiness in her chest when she realized there was no one left in the world who loved her. She would not let Theo feel that. "I am staying," Saraphina said, her voice hoarse but steady. Lorenzo raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "You know who you are staying for?" he asked. "Marcus Stone is a dangerous man. His world is a world of blood and death. You could be dragged into it at any time." "I know," Saraphina nodded, "but I am not staying for Marcus Stone." She looked down at Theo and gently smoothed his hair. "I am staying for Theo. This child just watched his father get stabbed. He made the call for help. He pressed the towel to the wound. He kept his father alive until I arrived. He should not be alone right now." She looked back up at Lorenzo. "I do not need your money. I do not need your protection. I just need to stay here until I know whether this boy's father lives or dies. That is all." Lorenzo studied her for a long moment, his deep gray eyes unreadable. Then he nodded slowly, the corner of his mouth lifting into the faintest suggestion of a smile. "You are the strangest woman I have ever met," he said, then stood and took out his phone. "I have some calls to make," he added. "Stay here with Theo. If you need anything, speak to my people." And he turned away, walking toward the end of the corridor with the phone to his ear, leaving Saraphina alone with the sleeping child and 1,000 unanswered questions. 3 days passed like a never-ending nightmare. Saraphina did not leave the hospital, sleeping on hard plastic chairs in the waiting room, eating meals from vending machines with money. Lorenzo pressed into her hand. She cared for Theo as if he were her own little brother, taking him to eat, to bathe in the hospital restroom, telling him stories each night until he drifted into sleep. Marcus remained in a coma. The surgery that night had succeeded in removing the knife and repairing the wound, but he had lost too much blood. The doctors said his body was fighting, but they did not know when he would wake up, or whether he ever would. Lorenzo arranged a private room for Marcus with guards posted 24 hours a day. He also brought clean clothes and personal items for Saraphina, though she refused anything of value, accepting only what was necessary to survive, nothing more and nothing less. On the 3rd day, everything changed. Saraphina was sitting outside Marcus's room, with Theo curled asleep beside her when she heard hurried footsteps and tense voices from inside. She stood and moved closer to the door, left slightly ajar, and listened. "Kidney function is deteriorating rapidly." The doctor's voice came out low and grave. "Massive blood loss has caused irreversible damage. Both kidneys are progressively failing. We tried dialysis, but his body is too unstable and is rejecting the treatment. Without a kidney transplant within 1 week to restore natural function, he will not survive." Saraphina felt as if someone had punched her in the chest. A transplant. 1 week, then transplant it. Lorenzo's voice cut in, cold and commanding. "Money is not an issue. Find a kidney for him. It is not that simple." The doctor replied patiently, as if explaining this again and again. "Mr. Stone has AB negative blood type, the rarest blood group, less than 1% of the population. The kidney transplant waiting list is very long, and for this blood type, the average wait is years, not days." "I do not care about the waiting list," Lorenzo snarled, and Saraphina could hear the slam of a fist on the table. "Find a kidney on the black market if you must." "I will pay any price, sir." The doctor's voice hardened. "This is a hospital, not a casino. We do not accept organs from illegal sources, and even if you found one, blood type is not the only issue. Tissue compatibility, antibodies. Dozens of other factors must be considered. An incompatible kidney would be rejected and kill the patient faster than no transplant at all." There was a heavy silence. Then Lorenzo's voice returned, this time weary and desperate. "Then what do you expect me to do? Sit here and watch him die? I suggest we test Mr. Stone's relatives," the doctor said. "Close blood relatives often have a higher chance of compatibility." "He has no close relatives," Lorenzo replied bitterly. "His parents are dead, no siblings. His ex-wife will never donate anything to Marcus. That leaves only Theo, and the boy is 6 years old. Then those close to him," the doctor suggested. "Friends, associates, anyone willing to be tested. It is our only hope." Saraphina heard Lorenzo let out a heavy sigh. In the days that followed, Marcus's men came to the hospital one by one to be tested. Dozens of large men in expensive suits lined up to give blood like children at a school checkup. But the results came back one after another, and each time the doctor shook his head. Not compatible, not compatible, not compatible. By the 5th day, Lorenzo looked as though he had aged 10 years, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep, his granite face now cracked with worry and despair. "There is no one left," he told Saraphina hoarsely. "All our people have been tested. No one is compatible." Saraphina looked at him, then into the hospital room, where Marcus lay motionless on the bed, tubes and wires snaking from his body to machines that kept him alive. She looked at Theo sitting by his father's side, small hand gripping his father's hand, lips moving as if whispering a prayer. Then she heard the doctor speaking to a nurse in the hallway. "AB negative blood type, the rarest of all, less than 1% of the population." And Saraphina stood frozen. She knew her own blood type. She had known since the orphanage, when they tested all the children regularly. She remembered the nurse looking at her in surprise and saying she had a very rare blood type, AB negative, less than 1% of the population, exactly the same as Marcus Stone. Saraphina did not tell anyone about what she had discovered. She needed to be absolutely certain first. She went to the hospital laboratory that afternoon. While Lorenzo was busy meeting with his men, and Theo was napping in Marcus's room, she told the nurse at the counter that she wanted blood tests and a general health check. She did not give the real reason. The results came back the next morning. The nurse called her into a private room and looked at her with concern. "You have AB negative blood type," she said, and we compared it with the medical file of patient Marcus Stone as part of the hospital's compatibility screening. "You are fully compatible." Saraphina's heart pounded wildly in her chest. She had known. She had known ever since she heard the doctor talk about Marcus's blood type, but hearing it confirmed still struck her like a bolt of lightning. "However," the nurse continued, her tone growing more serious, "your test results also show several concerning issues. You have chronic anemia. Your hemoglobin level is significantly lower than normal, and there are signs of long-term malnutrition. With your current health condition, donating a kidney would be extremely dangerous." Saraphina swallowed hard. "How dangerous?" she asked hoarsely. The nurse studied her for a long moment and then sighed. "I am not a doctor, but I can tell you the risk of complications is high, very high. You should speak directly with the surgeon before making any decision." Saraphina asked to see the doctor, and they arranged a meeting with Dr. Harrison, the surgeon in charge of Marcus's case. That afternoon, Dr. Harrison was a middle-aged man with graying hair and the weary eyes of someone who had witnessed too much life and death. He reviewed Saraphina's test results and then looked at her gravely. "Miss Cole, I will be frank with you," he said, setting the file down. "In terms of compatibility, you are a perfect candidate. Blood type, antibodies, tissue matching, everything aligns. If you were a healthy person, I would not hesitate to proceed, but you are not a healthy person." He stood and moved to the window, his back to her. "You have chronic anemia, likely since childhood, caused by prolonged malnutrition. Your body does not have enough red blood cells to transport oxygen efficiently. In a major surgery, such as kidney removal, your body would be under extreme stress. Blood loss during surgery, even within normal limits, could lead to serious complications for someone in your condition." He turned back to her, concern filling his eyes. "Put simply, this surgery could kill you." The room seemed to spin around Saraphina. She gripped the arm of the chair to keep from falling. "What are the odds?" she asked softly. "My odds of surviving." Dr. Harrison was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. 50%, he said. "Possibly less. I cannot give an exact number because there are too many variables. But you must understand this is a dangerous gamble. You could die on the operating table. You could survive the surgery but die from complications afterward. Or you could live, but with a significantly reduced quality of life, having only one kidney in a body that is already fragile. 50%, one half a chance to live, one half a chance to die. I do not advise you to do this," Dr. Harrison said gently. "You are young. You have your whole life ahead of you. That man, I know he matters to his son. But he is not your responsibility. You do not owe him your life." Saraphina did not answer. She stood, thanked the doctor, and quietly left the room. She wandered through the hospital with no clear direction, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. 50%. A coin toss. Heads or tails. Life or death. She found herself standing before the small chapel on the first floor, the dark wooden door slightly ajar, candlelight flickering inside. She did not know whether she believed in God. She had prayed when her mother died and her mother still died. She had prayed when Lily was sick and Lily still passed away. Perhaps God did not listen. Or perhaps he listened and the answer was always no. But still, Saraphina pushed the door open and stepped inside. She sat on an empty pew and looked up at the cross on the wall, and she wondered whether her life was worth anything at all. The small chapel lay wrapped in gentle darkness, lit only by candlelight that flickered and danced across the white walls. Saraphina sat alone on a wooden pew, her hands clasped together on her lap, her eyes lifted toward the crucifix without truly seeing it. 50%. The number spun endlessly in her mind, like a broken melody stuck on repeat. Half a chance to live, half a chance to die. She thought about her life. 27 years. She had lived 27 years in this world, and what did she have to show for it? Orphaned at 8 years old, raised in an orphanage where she was beaten when chores were not done, and starved when she dared to talk back. Thrown out at 18 for being too old, wandering the streets with a few dozen dollars in her pocket and nowhere to go. It took years of struggle to find her footing, but she eventually returned to volunteer at the orphanage. That was when she met Lily, a 7-year-old orphan with wide eyes and a smile like sunlight, to protect her from the things she herself had endured. Then Lily was diagnosed with leukemia and Saraphina's world collapsed. 2 years of fighting the disease, 2 years of chemotherapy and radiation, Sleepless nights in the hospital, 2 years of hope and despair, and hope again. And in the end, Lily still lost. She remembered the final night. Lily lying in the hospital bed, so thin her cheekbones protruded, skin pale as paper, her hair long gone, her head wrapped in a pink scarf Saraphina had bought with a month of savings. "Sister Sarah," Lily had called weakly, like a breath. "Can you promise me something?" Saraphina had held her hand, tears streaming down her face without wiping them away. "I promise anything you want." Lily smiled. A smile Saraphina would never forget until the day she died. "You have to live for me," Lily said, her voice trembling but steady. "I know I will not live much longer. Do not cry. I am not afraid. I am only sad I cannot stay with you. But you have to promise me. You have to live. You have to become a nurse, like you always dreamed. You have to save others, because I no longer have the chance. You have to live for both of us." Saraphina had promised. She had held Lily and promised to live, promised to become a nurse, promised to save people. Then she went to work a night shift, because she needed money for hospital bills. And when she came back, Lily was gone, alone, in the dark, calling her sister's name until her final breath with no one answering. Tears streamed down Saraphina's face in the small chapel. Had she kept her promise? Was she living? Yes, she was breathing, but was she truly living or merely existing? Working 3 jobs to survive, sleeping 4 hours a night, eating 1 meal a day, no friends, no lover, no family, only a distant dream of becoming a nurse she was climbing toward penny by penny with no idea when she would arrive. If she died tonight, who would cry? Who would remember her? Who would come to her funeral? Perhaps no one. She would be buried among the nameless with an unmarked stone, and the world would keep turning as if she had never existed. But if she lived and Marcus died, Theo would lose his father. A 6-year-old child would become an orphan like her, like Lily, growing up with a wound that would never heal, waking at night, calling for his father with no answer, carrying that pain for the rest of his life. Saraphina thought of Theo, of the wide, hopeful eyes that looked at her, of the small hand gripping his father's every day at the bedside, of the trembling voice on the phone that night begging someone to come save his dad. Then she thought of Lily, of the promise she had failed, of her sister's final gaze filled with faith that Saraphina would save others. "You have to save others because I no longer have the chance," Lily had said. Now Saraphina had the chance to save one life, a father, a human being, but the price might be her own life. She sat in the chapel's darkness, tears flowing, her heart breaking with fear and pain. She did not want to die. She was afraid of dying. She was only 27 and had done nothing with her life. But she also could not sit by and watch a child lose his father. Not after everything she had lived through. Not after Lily. She remained there alone until her tears ran dry. Then she stood, wiped her face with her sleeve, and drew a deep breath. "I promised Lily," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking but firm. "I will keep my promise," and she stepped out of the chapel to find Lorenzo. Saraphina found Lorenzo sitting alone in the waiting area, his head bowed, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, weary gray eyes studying her with suspicion. "I will donate my kidney to Marcus," Saraphina said, her voice strangely calm. Lorenzo sprang to his feet, shock written across his face. "What did you say?" "I have AB negative blood," she continued without letting him interrupt. "I have been tested. I am fully compatible. I will donate my kidney." Lorenzo stared at her as if she had grown another head. Then he stepped forward, gripping her shoulders, his voice trembling. "How much do you want? 1 million, 2 million. Name your price. I will pay anything." Saraphina shoved his hands away, her eyes blazing with fury. "I am not selling my organs," she said, her voice cold as ice. "I do not want your money. I am doing this for Theo. Because I will not let a child lose his father. Do you understand? I am not selling my life. I am choosing to save a life. Those are 2 very different things." Lorenzo stood frozen, staring at her, his gray eyes filling with tears, and for the first time since Saraphina met him, she saw a tear roll down the granite cheek of this powerful man. He said nothing, only nodded, then turned away to call Dr. Harrison. Everything moved quickly after that. Saraphina signed the consent forms to donate her kidney, asking for no conditions in return. Dr. Harrison looked at her with a complicated expression, half admiration and half fear. But he no longer tried to stop her. He only said they would do everything possible to keep her safe. The surgery was scheduled for the following morning. That night, Saraphina could not sleep. She sat beside Theo's bed, watching the boy sleep, wondering if this would be the last time she saw that peaceful face. The next morning, as she lay on the gurney being wheeled toward the operating room, Theo ran to her. He clung to her, sobbing, his small shoulders shaking. "Aunt Sarah, you have to live," he said through tears. "Promise me, you have to live." Saraphina smiled, gently lifted his face and kissed his forehead. "I promise," she said softly, like a lullaby. "I will be here when you and your dad wake up. I promise." Lorenzo gently pulled the boy away. Saraphina watched until the operating room doors closed, and just before the anesthesia took hold, she saw a familiar figure standing at the end of the corridor. Lily, her sister, stood there wearing the white dress she had been buried in, her long black hair shining as it had before illness took everything. Lily smiled at her, warm as sunlight, and gave a small nod as if to say she was proud. Saraphina smiled back and slipped into darkness. Outside the operating room, Lorenzo and Theo waited. Marcus's men stood scattered along the corridor, faces taut with fear. No one spoke. No one dared breathe too loudly. The first hour passed, then the second, then the third. A nurse came out to say the kidney had been successfully removed and was being transplanted into Marcus. Lorenzo exhaled in relief, but it did not last. The fourth hour passed, then the fifth. The operating room doors burst open and a nurse ran out, her face tight with urgency. "Dr. Harrison needs more AB-negative blood immediately," she shouted. "The donor is experiencing severe blood loss. There are complications." Lorenzo leapt to his feet, the color draining from his face. She will be all right, won't she? "We are doing everything we can," the nurse said before running off. The sixth hour passed with no further news. Lorenzo paced like a caged beast, his granite face cracked by terror. A man who had killed without blinking and faced death daily now had hands that shook uncontrollably, and Theo knelt on the cold hospital floor, small hands clasped, eyes shut tight, lips whispering prayers he remembered from the nanny, praying for his father, praying for Aunt Sarah, praying that neither of them would leave him. In the seventh hour, the operating room doors opened, and Dr. Harrison stepped out, utterly exhausted, his surgical gown soaked with sweat and blood. Lorenzo sprang forward, his heart seeming to stop in his chest. "They both survived," Dr. Harrison said, his voice exhausted but relieved. "Mr. Stone received the kidney successfully, and his body is showing no signs of rejection. As for Miss Cole, she lost far more blood than anticipated, and we nearly lost her on the operating table. But she is a fighter. She is still alive. However, she is extremely weak, and will need close monitoring for several days." Lorenzo collapsed into a chair, his shoulders trembling with relief. He covered his face with both hands, and Theo could see tears slipping through his fingers. The boy was not sure he had ever seen Mr. Lorenzo cry before. He ran to the old man and wrapped his arms around him, and the two of them wept together in silence. 3 days later, Marcus Stone opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was a blinding white ceiling and harsh fluorescent lights. His head felt as heavy as stone, and every muscle in his body ached. He turned his head with effort, and saw Theo curled asleep on the chair beside the bed, his small face noticeably thinner. "Theo." He tried to call out, but his voice was only a hoarse whisper. His son was still here. His son was still safe. The door opened softly, and Lorenzo stepped in. When he saw Marcus awake, the old man's face lit up. He hurried to the bedside, gray eyes glistening. "You are awake," Lorenzo said, his voice shaking. "Thank God, you are awake." "What happened?" Marcus asked, struggling to remember. He remembered Vincent, remembered the knife, remembered the icy shock as steel pierced flesh, remembered falling to the floor and seeing Theo run toward him before everything went dark. "Vincent betrayed you," Lorenzo said grimly. "He stabbed you and left, thinking you would die. But Theo called for help, and a woman came to save you." Marcus frowned. "What woman?" Lorenzo pulled up a chair and began to tell him everything, about the call at 2:17 in the morning to a small diner across the city, about a 27-year-old waitress who decided to drive through the night to save a complete stranger, about how she dragged Marcus to her car alone, though her body was barely half his size, about the frantic drive to the hospital, about how she gave up every dollar she had and the only watch her mother left her to pay the hospital fees, about how she stayed to care for Theo during the days Marcus lay unconscious, and about how when she learned he needed a kidney transplant and she was the only compatible donor, she agreed without hesitation, even knowing the surgery could kill her. Marcus lay there in stunned silence, unable to believe what he was hearing. "What did she want?" he asked hoarsely. "How much money did she ask for?" Lorenzo shook his head, gray eyes filled with a kind of astonishment Marcus had never seen before. "Nothing," he said. "She did not take a single cent. She even became angry when I offered to pay. She said she did this for Theo, because she did not want a child to lose his father. That was all. Marcus had no words. He had lived in a world where everything had a price. Loyalty had a price. Silence had a price. Even a life had a price. He had never met anyone who gave without demanding something in return. Until now. Where is she? He asked. Next door. Lorenzo replied. She is still very weak. The doctors said she nearly died on the operating table. Lost too much blood, but she survived. She is a fighter. Marcus ordered a wheelchair brought. Lorenzo tried to object, reminding him he had just woken and needed rest. But when he saw the look in Marcus's steel blue eyes, he knew there was no stopping him. Minutes later, Marcus was wheeled into the room next door. The door opened, and he saw her for the first time while they were both awake. She lay on the hospital bed, so thin that the sharp lines of her cheekbones and collarbones stood out beneath pale skin. Dark brown hair spread across the white pillow, eyes closed, long lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. She looked as fragile as a flower on the verge of wilting, but she was alive. She was breathing. Marcus motioned for Lorenzo to wheel him closer to her bed. Then he sat there, gazing at the stranger who had saved his life twice, who had given him a part of her own body, without asking for anything in return. He noticed the burn scar on her wrist, and knew she had endured more suffering than he could imagine. He sat there for hours without speaking, simply watching her breathe and wondering how a person like her could exist in this world at all. Saraphina opened her eyes late the following afternoon, her head heavy as if weighed down with lead, her body aching in every fiber, her throat so dry she was not sure she could even speak. But she was alive. She felt the afternoon sunlight filtering through the window, warm against her skin. She smelled the familiar antiseptic scent of the hospital. She felt her heart beating steadily in her chest. She was alive, and then she felt someone watching her. She turned her head to the side, and her eyes met a pair of steel blue eyes fixed on her. Marcus Stone sat in a wheelchair beside her bed, his face still pale from blood loss and surgery, yet his eyes burned with an emotion Saraphina could not name. He looked nothing like the man she had seen that night. Then he had been dying, white as paper, lying motionless in a pool of blood. Now, though still weak, he radiated a power and presence she had never seen in anyone before. His features were sharp as if carved from stone, a strong square jaw, coal-black hair, slightly disheveled from days in the hospital. But it was his eyes that held her captive, those steel blue eyes, deep and intense, now gazing at her with a softness that felt almost unreal. "You are awake," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "The doctor said you nearly died." Saraphina tried to smile, but her lips were cracked, and her facial muscles refused to cooperate. "Almost," she whispered, "but not dead." Silence followed. Marcus did not look away, his steel blue gaze as if trying to read every thought in her mind. Then he asked, his voice low and confused. "Why?" Saraphina knew what he meant. Why she answered the call, why she drove through the night, why she dragged him to the car, why she gave all her money and her watch, why she donated her kidney, why she was willing to die for a stranger. "For Theo," she answered, her voice weak but certain. "No child deserves to lose their father." Marcus frowned, as though that answer was not enough. "You do not know who I am," he said, bewilderment in his tone. "You do not know what I have done in my life. I am the man people call a devil. I may be the worst man in this world, and you are willing to die for me." Saraphina looked at him, into those steel blue eyes filled with darkness and buried pain. She knew who he was. Lorenzo had told her. She knew he was a Mafia boss. She knew he had killed more people than could be counted. She knew his world was one of blood and death. But she also knew how Theo spoke of him. She knew the look in the boy's eyes when he spoke about his father. She knew the small hand that had held his father's hand through every day of the coma. "I know who you are," she said gently. "But to Theo, you are his whole world. You are his father. You are the tallest, strongest, most wonderful man he knows. That is enough." She paused, drawing a painful breath. "I lost my parents when I was 8. I know what that feels like. I lost my sister when I could do nothing to save her. I do not want Theo to go through that. Not if I can stop it." Marcus said nothing. He only stared at her, his steel blue eyes shimmering with something Saraphina recognized as tears. She had never imagined a man like Marcus Stone could cry. Slowly he reached out his hand toward her. His hand was large and rough, marked with calluses and scars from a lifetime of violence. The hand of a killer, the hand of a Mafia boss. Yet now it trembled like the hand of a frightened child seeking comfort. Saraphina looked at his hand for a moment, then lifted her own and placed it in his palm. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, yet unexpectedly gentle. He held her hand as if she were the most precious thing in the world, as if he feared she might shatter if he held her too tightly. They sat there in silence, their hands entwined. No more words needed. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening light filled the room, bathing two broken souls, holding hands for the first time, and in that moment they both knew that their lives would never be the same again. 2 weeks after the surgery, Marcus took Saraphina to his safe house in the mountains. She refused at first, saying she did not want to be a burden, that she could take care of herself, but Marcus looked at her with those cold steel blue eyes and said in a tone that accepted no argument that her kidney was keeping him alive and he would not risk it failing because she refused to care for herself. Saraphina found no words to argue back. Marcus's safe house was no ordinary home. It was a massive wooden lodge perched beside a lake as clear as jade, surrounded by mountains blanketed in evergreen pines. The air was so pure, Saraphina felt as though her lungs were being cleansed with every breath. The peace here was nothing like the horns and exhaust of the city she had known all her life. The days of recovery flowed slowly, like the still water of the lake. Saraphina spent most of her time with Theo, helping him study, reading him stories every night, playing board games and building puzzles with him each afternoon. The boy clung to her like a small kitten, following her everywhere, calling her Aunt Sarah in a bright voice full of affection. Marcus often watched them from a distance. He did not speak much, did not join their games. He simply stood there, leaning against a doorway or sitting in an armchair by the fireplace, steel blue eyes tracking Saraphina's every movement. She knew he was watching. She always felt his gaze like invisible heat against her skin. But she said nothing, and neither did he. Then small changes began to appear. One morning, Saraphina woke to find a vase of fresh lavender on the table beside her bed. She did not remember telling anyone she liked lavender. Yet somehow Marcus knew. One evening she felt cold, curled on the sofa reading, and the next morning the heating in her room had been turned up noticeably. No one said a word, but she knew who had done it. Then there were the nights by the fireplace. After Theo fell asleep, Marcus and Saraphina would sit in the large living room, the fire crackling in the stone hearth, warm orange light dancing on the walls, and that was when they talked. Marcus spoke of Vivian, his ex-wife. She was beautiful, he said, his voice low and distant. Beautiful like a poisonous flower. I loved her madly. I gave her everything, but she was a spy for my enemies. She lay in my bed every night and reported my every move to them. When I discovered the truth, I had to deal with her. He stopped, his eyes darkening. I have not trusted any woman since. Until I met you. Saraphina spoke of her own life, of parents lost in a fire, of years in an orphanage where she was beaten and starved, of a former lover who deceived her and stole 5 years of savings, of Lily, the foster sister she loved more than herself, of the night Lily died alone while Saraphina was at work, of the guilt she had carried for 2 years. They were two broken people facing one another across the firelight, and for the first time feeling understood. One night Theo had a nightmare. His cries echoed down the hallway, and Saraphina reached him before Marcus did. She gathered the boy into her arms, stroked his hair, and sang a lullaby she once sang to Lily. Her voice was not beautiful, but Theo slowly calmed and fell asleep in her embrace. When Saraphina looked up, she saw Marcus standing in the doorway, steel blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. He said nothing. He only stood there watching her hold his son, and on his stone-cold face appeared something Saraphina recognized as longing. She gently laid Theo back on the bed, tucked him in, and stepped into the hallway. Marcus was still there, blocking her path, the air between them suddenly thick and heavy. Saraphina was about to speak when Marcus moved first. He stepped forward, pressed her back against the wall, his arms braced on either side of her head, steel blue eyes burning into hers. Fierce and desperate, then he kissed her. The kiss was powerful and raw, like a drowning man finally finding air, his mouth hot against hers, his hand sliding into her hair, pulling her closer as if he wanted to dissolve her into himself. Saraphina kissed him back, wrapping her arms around his neck, drawing him down, meeting him as though she had waited her entire life for this moment, and for the first time in 27 years, she felt truly loved. 2 weeks of peace passed like a beautiful dream, but Saraphina should have known that every dream must eventually end. That night she woke to an explosion, to gunfire. She bolted upright in bed, with her heart hammering wildly. Outside the window, flames flared at the main gate of the lodge. Shouts echoed from the distance. Frantic footsteps pounded. Gunshots cracked again and again like fireworks on New Year's Eve. Her door flew open, and Marcus appeared, his face cold as ice, a sleek black gun in his hand. He was no longer the gentle man who had kissed her by the firelight. He was the stone, the Mafia boss with a heart of stone. "Vincent," he said curtly. "He found this place. He brought men with him." Saraphina felt her blood turn to ice. Vincent, the man who had stabbed Marcus, the man who had nearly killed him, the man she thought had been dealt with long ago. "Take Theo to the safe room," Marcus ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Stay there until I come for you. Do not come out for any reason. Do you understand?" Saraphina nodded. There was no time for fear. She ran to Theo's room where the boy had woken to the gunfire and was curled on the bed, wide eyes filled with terror. "Aunt Sarah," he cried, throwing himself into her arms. "I am scared. Bad people are here. I know, my love," she said, holding him tight and forcing her voice to stay calm. "But I will protect you. Come with me." She took Theo's hand and ran toward the safe room at the end of the hall, a chamber Marcus had built with steel walls and a bulletproof door strong enough to withstand any attack. They were almost there when a dark figure appeared at the corner of the corridor, a large man in a black mask holding a long knife that gleamed with steel. He saw Saraphina and Theo and let out a grotesque laugh. "The girl and the kid," he sneered. "The boss will pay big if I bring the brat back." Saraphina shoved Theo behind her and stepped forward, placing herself between the boy and the attacker. She had no weapon. She was only weeks out of surgery. Her body still weak. She weighed barely 48 kilograms, and the man before her was twice her size, but she would not let him touch Theo. The man advanced with the knife raised. Saraphina looked around in desperation, and her eyes landed on the vase of lavender on the console table nearby. She did not think. She simply acted. She grabbed the vase and hurled it straight at his face. It shattered on impact. Water and flowers exploding everywhere, shards of porcelain slicing his skin. He screamed and clutched his face as blood streamed through his fingers. Saraphina seized Theo's hand and ran. She pushed him into the safe room and punched in the code Marcus had taught her. The steel door slammed shut with a heavy hiss. "Aunt Sarah," Theo sobbed, clinging to her. "Stay with me. Do not go." But Saraphina did not stay. She kissed his forehead and looked into his tear-filled eyes. "Stay here," she said. "Do not open the door for anyone except your father or me. I will come back, I promise." Then she turned and ran before he could grab her. She had to find Marcus. She did not know why, but she knew he needed her. The sound of gunfire led her to the great hall, where the sight before her was hell itself. Bodies lay scattered across the floor. Blood smeared everywhere. Furniture overturned. Glass shattered, and in the center of the room Marcus faced Vincent. Vincent was taller than she remembered, with hair red as flame and eyes wild with madness. He held a knife to Marcus's throat while blood flowed from a wound in Marcus's shoulder. His right arm hung uselessly at his side. "You should have died," Vincent hissed with venom. "You do not deserve to be boss. You are weak. You let a woman make you soft." Saraphina screamed. She did not think. She simply acted. Her cry made Vincent jerk and turn, just for a second, but a second was enough. Marcus surged forward. His left hand clamped onto Vincent's wrist and twisted hard. The knife clattered to the floor. Then he drove his fist into the traitor's face with all the strength he had left. Vincent fell, but he was not finished. He kicked Marcus's leg, making him stagger. The two men rolled across the floor, trading brutal blows, until Marcus pinned Vincent down and wrapped both hands around his throat. "You touched my family," he growled, his voice cold as death. "You die." The crack of a breaking neck echoed sharply through the sudden silence. Vincent lay still, eyes staring lifelessly at the ceiling. Marcus staggered to his feet, blood pouring from his shoulder. He turned to Saraphina, steel blue eyes filled with fear. "You are insane," he said, his voice shaking. "You almost died for me again." After the battle that night, everything changed. The rival gang was completely wiped out and the few survivors scattered like rats. Vincent was dead, and the greatest threat to the Stone family was gone forever. Marcus had to remain in the hospital for another week because of the wound in his shoulder, and Saraphina never left his bedside. She sat there holding his hand, reading to him, and arguing with him whenever he refused to rest. Lorenzo watched them from outside the door, and a rare smile appeared on his granite face as he told one of the men that she was the first woman who ever made Marcus afraid. Afraid of losing her, afraid of not being worthy of her, afraid that she would leave him. When Marcus recovered, he took Saraphina and Theo to the lakeshore on a night of a full moon. The water lay smooth as glass, reflecting countless shimmering stars. The clean air carried the scent of pine and damp earth, and it was the most beautiful place Saraphina had ever seen. Marcus stopped at the end of the wooden pier and turned to her. In the moonlight, his steel blue eyes were strangely gentle, utterly unlike the cold gaze of the Mafia boss the world feared. He told her slowly and softly that he had arranged everything for her, that the best nursing school in the city had accepted her, that a private home in a safe neighborhood was waiting for her, and that a bank account large enough for her to live comfortably for the rest of her life without working had been set aside. Saraphina felt as if someone had punched the air from her chest, and tears began to fall before she could stop them as she asked in a broken voice if he was sending her away. Marcus looked horrified and stepped forward, gripping her shoulders, telling her urgently that it was not that at all, that he did these things because if she chose to refuse him, he still wanted her to have the best life possible, that he wanted her happy, whether she stayed with him or not, but that he hoped and begged her not to turn him away. And then Marcus Stone, the most powerful Mafia boss on the East Coast, went down on one knee before a poor former diner waitress. He took a small box from his jacket, opened it, and inside lay a diamond ring glittering beneath the moonlight as he spoke her name with a voice trembling with emotion, telling her that a part of her body was keeping him alive, that her kidney beat inside him every day, reminding him that she had saved him and given him a second chance, but that she had not only saved his life, she had saved his heart, the heart he believed had died long ago, that she was his home, and the only light in the darkness he had lived in all his life, and he asked her to be his wife, to be Theo's mother, and to stay by his side forever. Small footsteps ran across the wooden boards, and Theo appeared, dropping to his knees beside his father with shining, hopeful eyes as he begged her to say yes, promising he would be good, that he would eat all his vegetables and do anything she wanted if only she would stay with him and his father. Saraphina cried then, harder than she ever had, but these were tears of happiness, as she looked at the powerful man kneeling before her and the 6-year-old boy gazing up at her with all the hope in his heart, and knew her answer. She said yes, with a voice shaking but certain. Marcus rose, slipped the ring onto her finger, pulled her into his arms and kissed her beneath the moonlight, while Theo jumped with joy and wrapped his arms around them both, his laughter echoing across the still lake. 1 year later, Saraphina stepped onto the graduation stage of nursing school, wearing a green gown and square cap. She looked down at the front row where Marcus and Theo sat cheering and clapping like children, and she smiled as her hand rested gently on her 6-month pregnant belly. Inside was a small new life, proof of her love with Marcus, and a future she had never dared to dream of. When she stepped down, Marcus greeted her with a long kiss, despite the whistles and laughter around them, and whispered that she had climbed her mountain, and that he was so proud of her. Saraphina smiled through happy tears, and answered softly that she had not climbed a mountain but had found her home, and in that moment she seemed to see Lily standing at the edge of the crowd in the familiar white dress with long black hair lifting in the breeze, her sister smiling warmly like sunlight and telling her that she had done it, that she had kept her promise and that she was loved. Then Lily faded into the light, but Saraphina knew she would always live in her heart, and in the arms of the man she loved, beside the son she had saved and the daughter growing within her. Saraphina Cole had finally found where she belonged. This story offers us many profound lessons about life. Sometimes the craziest decisions lead to the most wonderful outcomes. Sometimes giving without expecting anything in return brings us more than we ever dared to hope for. Love knows no limits, and kindness is always repaid in unexpected ways. No matter how difficult life becomes, never give up hope and never stop believing in goodness. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video to help spread meaningful stories to more people each day. We would love to hear your thoughts and how this story made you feel, or what it reminded you of in your own life. Leave a comment below to share what is in your heart. Every comment is a priceless source of motivation that helps us continue creating quality content. We wish everyone watching good health, a joyful life, and days filled with love. May you always find peace within your soul, even when life becomes difficult. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.